Welcome all. I'm joined by journalist Tigrane Yegavian, who recently authored a book titled Minorities of the Middle East, The Forgotten History. It's available in Armenian and French. Yegavian also has another upcoming book called The Black Book. We will be discussing today the current state of affairs between Armenia and the diaspora. So Tigrane, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.
To start off, can you explain a bit about the historical background with regards to the relations between Armenia and the diaspora? Can you explain the history in order so one can understand better the relationship between Armenia and the diaspora, which goes back many decades?
Yeah, sure. Armenia, as you know, is surrounded by true enemies and false friends, and we must consider diaspora as a strategic asset for Armenia. Unfortunately, this relation is suffering many weaknesses. These weaknesses and this groundless relation stems from, I think, the end of the 80s, when the diasporic old traditional parties were not really with the idea to get an independent statehood. And I think there are a lot of missed opportunities stemming in that period. And unfortunately, the gap between the two shores of the Armenian world was becoming wider. During the Levante Petrosyan administration, Armenians from diaspora were not allowed to get the dual citizenship, the Armenian citizenship, and this was definitely a negative message delivering from Yerevan to diaspora investors, diaspora human resources, etc. Things changed during Robert Kocharian's period when there were modification of the constitution, which allowed the dual citizenship, I think, in 2005. But what it's important to point out is that, and the fact is that the relation between diaspora and Armenia was something irrelevant, because there were just 2 or 3 elements characterizing this relation. The first was tourism, the other one was humanitarian assistance, humanitarian aid through the Armenian Հիմնադրամին Fund and other organizations, and the third one was limited impact investments. So we missed a strategic an historical opportunity to implement a strategic relation based on mutual respect and the appreciation of mutual interest. During Robert Kocharian's, after the principal political party of diaspora, the IRF, were banned during Levante Petrosyan, but when after they reopened his office in Yerevan, there was something like the repartition of skills, of tasks repartition, and it was up to Armenian political forces, namely the Tashnaksutun, to carry out the battle, the struggle to the international recognition of the genocide, and up to Armenian authorities to deal with the state building. And unfortunately, Armenia didn't enjoy the potential of diasporic forces in order to implement a strategic plan to make a state building, because the principal problem is that basically Armenians abroad, as Armenian, they lack the sense of the statehood, because we haven't this experience of political sovereignty throughout the centuries, and we lack this experience, this knowledge, and it's a question of awareness. And what is the main characteristic of the diaspora is that we used to make a confusion between two concepts: the concept of nation, which is the Haidadism, the concept nationhood, which is something more irrational or something more sentimental, and on the other hand, the conception of the statehood. And I think this last 44 years, a day war, shown us how wider was the gap between the two shores of the Armenian world.
And I also want to mention the issue of narrative, which you kind of mentioned already in your answer. What was wrong about the original narrative? You also kind of mentioned, but I want to ask, what do you think about the need to find a new narrative with regards to Armenia-diaspora relations? Do you have any ideas of what even that narrative could be?
First of all, we must point out that there is no narrative currently in diaspora because the political forces are not prepared to establish an agenda. There is no agenda, there is no vision about what can be the future of the relation between Armenia and the communities abroad. But if we must think about the narrative, I think that we wasted a lot of time, we lost a lot of time by thinking about memory, about genocide, about the folklore, and we didn't spend our energies in order to defend Artsakh and Armenia, and I think that there is a shared burden and a shared responsibilities of the collapse, because the demographic collapse of Armenia may be, I think, the top priority of the agenda of our diaspora, and we weren't able to assess how critical was this demographical issue, because this is, you know, the first thing. So if we want to rethink, to figure out about the new narrative, I think the most important things to get in mind is the necessity to get station a state, and you know, as French Armenian abroad, I know that the Kurds and the Chaldeans and those they have jealousy toward Armenians because we still having a state, but we weren't able to use it as a tool in order to create a new narrative and a new agenda, a new vision in order to take lessons from the past wrong things.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, there is a perception that the 2020 Karabakh War turned relations between between Armenia and the diaspora on its head. I'm wondering what you think is the significance of the 44-day war in Armenia-diaspora relations.
Let's be realistic. Diaspora, although they were a web mobilization through the social networks, a humanitarian end, but they were not a direct participation in the battlefront. So this is the first thing. So diaspora wasn't ready to face the challenge of a new war. They weren't enough aware about the gravity of the situation and the complexity of this conflict, and were able to explain the narrative of the Armenian side. This is, I think, the responsibility of diaspora. And on the other hand, I think I belong to a generation who grew up with the illusion that the first Karabakh War was a final victory. And this last war showed us that it was just a ceasefire. And I remember also what, I think this is Robert Kocharian who used to say this very famous quote that even if Azerbaijan have oil and they enjoy these resources, Artsakh can count on diaspora, and diaspora is like the oil of Artsakh. And unfortunately, this last war shown us that it was an illusion, and this illusion stems also for what can I call the national ideology. And we were wrong on the name of this national ideology, which it prevented us to get a modern political thought, which are really distinctive things. We cannot continue this way. We need a new paradigm, and the new paradigm must be based on the need to get a strong state, because without strong state, there is no strong diaspora, definitely.
And I want to talk about some of the different sectors which you've written in the past as well that could perhaps alleviate this phenomenon. One is the education sector. So for example, you have mentioned that there is no diaspora research center in Armenia. So I'm wondering, how can the education sector get involved? How can the education sector help? And this can also be applied the other way, vice versa. Within the diaspora, there is also a problem with regards to knowledge of Armenia, Artsakh, and its issues. So can we narrow the gap between Armenia and the diaspora through intellectual tools?
This is the top priority now, is to narrow the gap, because we left 30 years with illusions, in the name of the national ideology, but in the name of the mistakes committed by the current and the former administration, being Armenia and in diaspora. But what I can notice, and I think it's very strange, because there is no think tanks in Armenia, there is no working on diasporic studies, there is no diasporic studies among university, even inside the academic of science of Armenia. Even if we get good experts of Orientalism, Arabic world of Iranian world, but there is, a huge lack of knowledge. We don't know each other's.
Even the Turkic world as well.
Yeah. So I think that it's very interesting to implement if you want to build a new narrative, to change the paradigm. Education remains a top priority, and education must be implemented throughout human resources from diaspora in Armenia. Armenia must be, a platform in order to catch up new diasporic scholars, being from the US or from Western Europe or Lebanon, in order to create a new school of thought. And we have here tools like the French University, the American University, which can be helpful in order to create a new kind of narrative. So I think that is very important to stress about the need to get objective knowledge about the current state of diaspora in order to not live with illusions about what's going on. And the second thing I think is related with political participation. It's the second challenge,
which I want to come to. I mean, there is a proposal that political representation is, or participation is another means of narrowing the gap. There are those that propose that diaspora members should have seats within the Armenian parliament, but there are other proposals as well. So what do you think about political representation and participation? Is this another way that can narrow the gap, even if it's symbolic?
It's a sensitive question because, as you know, Armenia is a state in war, so there's a question of national security, and there's the first argument, which I totally aware and I respect, is that people here don't want. There's no willingness to associate diasporic elites in the process, the state building process, for several reasons. I don't want to go into details, but what I can notice is that if we get a quota of MPs from abroad, it will be definitely a way to change the paradigm, because you cannot afford, you must acknowledge that Armenia is in demographic collapse, and more or less 65 or 70% of the Armenian nation now is living abroad outside of the boundaries of the Republic of Armenia. So if we get a quota of, 10 or 15 or more or less more deputies from MPs from diaspora, it will be a way to create a new culture of working, a new political culture inside the Armenian institutions, because what is at stake now is that, unfortunately, the Armenian current institutions are living in a kind of post-Sovietism. So there is no, a new way, a new creativity, the lack of creativity in order to understand what's going on. So this is very important for me in a symbolical way. The problem is how to implement this and how to create a democratic mechanism abroad in order to get it possible. And the second thing I think is more symbolical. You have a president in Armenia which hasn't a lot of prerogatives, that's protocolar and prerogatives. Ceremonial prerogatives. But if he gets elected by all the Armenia abroad, he will definitely represent not just the interest of the Armenian Republic, but all the nation, Armenian nation interest. So it's very important. And what I have in mind is the case of the island. For Ireland, for instance, Ireland is a small country with 5 million, I think, inhabitants. But Ireland has a very important diaspora, and there is about 40 million Irish ascendant Americans, for instance. And if I'm not wrong, the president of Ireland is elected by all the Irish abroad. So there is this kind of proposals. Armenia has a lot of by inspiring with all the patterns of state diaspora mechanism of regulation, because there is a lack of creativity here. And if we look about what's going on in Portugal, for instance, on Ireland, or even in Switzerland, a country we developed a lot of tools in order to get mechanism of regulation, political mechanisms. Armenia has a lot to win. So I think it's definitely a big challenge, and we must face this challenge in a positive way, because unfortunately I don't see any willingness among the Armenian elites or even Armenian opposition forces in order to associate diaspora talents, diasporic human resources in the state building process. And this is definitely a strategic issue regarding the gravity of the current situation. I remember Armenia is surrounded by true enemies, by false friends, and diaspora is not used as a tool for the Armenian soft power and the hard power as well.
I mean, you mentioned the Irish example, and India is also an example of a country where the diaspora have seats in the parliament. I also want to talk about the involvement of the media. Could diaspora human resources be used for a modernized media in Armenia that's broadcasted in Armenian and other languages from within Armenia? What do you think about the potential involvement of the media to narrow the gap?
Definitely, because we talk about education, intellectual involvement, political participation, and the third point is based on media's importance in order to create a new narrative. So what we missed during the war, it was a lack of narrative or a common narrative, because our enemies are talking just about one narrative, and we missed a lot of seriousness and discipline in order to be heard, worldwide. And I think that what is at stake now is to implement new channels, new international channels broadcasted from Yerevan, but in several languages, not just Eastern Armenian or Western Armenia, but there is definitely a need to broadcast new medias like CivilNet, but in another way, in order to deliver a clear message, for instance, for the Islamized Armenians, because it's a strategic, they are our neighbors. There are millions of Armenians looking for their roots, who are the awareness of their origins, and they're looking for their past. And if we are able to broadcast, special programs for the Hamshen Armenians or the Armenians from Diyarbakir who are living in the Kurdish area, it will be definitely a strategic asset for Armenia in order to get more safe. The second thing is to catch up diasporic journalists from France, from the US, from South America, in order to create a new international channel like Israel is doing with I-24, because it's the best way to create, as I said, a new narrative in order to be stronger and also deliver crucial message for the diasporic public, because unfortunately the current contents which are broadcasted by the public Armenian medias are not enough for diaspora in order to keep their identity, their Armenianness. And this is, this is coming from, you have a discussion now in diaspora about the new model and the old diaspora, the classic diaspora on the one hand, and the other diaspora. And I guess personally that there is no classical diaspora, there is no more diaspora. No, we must stress and talk about transnational communities, networks, working in a very specific way, looking at a specific aim, specific goal, professional networks. And this is definitely the future of our diaspora. We cannot carry on like, since the end of the war of Lebanon and the collapse of the Armenian Syrian communities, a lot of things are changing. There's a huge shift of the Armenian center of gravity from the Middle East to the Western societies, where communities are more are facing the challenge of assimilations. So that's why we must make a reset, understand that we cannot carry on with the old model, with the old pattern of diaspora, traditional institutions and structures, even though they are very crucial, important. So that's why media should be very important in order to raise awareness about the challenge of the identity. Once again, I repeat, I grew up in the 90s, 2000 with a lot of illusions, and thanks to the old pattern, I learned Armenian language in Middle Eastern communities. But I do feel the lack of modern media as a journalist, and I'm afraid that if we don't make anything, a new generation will grow up with the feeling of being defeated, with the shame to be Armenian, and the feeling to get a burden. So Armenianness should be different things. That's why we definitely need to create and implement a new narrative through the media.
Okay, well, Tigrane Yegavian, insightful as always. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.